Hey guys, I've been planning on using my online alias Nyferi for this channel, but because of how BookTube is, I think I'm just going to stick with my real name. So I'm Gina, and I'm excited to do my first wrap-up video, so let's go. So in January, I read 14 books, about 183 hours of audiobooks, and 384 pages, or a grand total of about 6,450 pages. So the first book for January was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It was not what I was expecting. Everybody knows the basic story of Frankenstein and his monster, but it's anything but a cheap horror story. What it means to be alive and the burden of knowledge were the two themes that really made me enjoy this book, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. Dan Stevens was the narrator for the audiobook, and I'd previously listened to And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, narrated by him, and he's just great. He tends to get a little overdramatic, but it really works with this melodramatic book. Blindness by José Saramago was next. I really love this book, and I find it a very interesting twist on the dystopian novel, and it's really scary to me because it feels like something that really could happen. A disease sweeps the world which causes everyone to go into a white blindness, and you follow the story of a doctor, an ophthalmologist, and his wife, who does not go blind, as they are sent into quarantine at the very beginning of the outbreak. Now this was a reread for me, but the first time listening to an audiobook. I really enjoyed reading the physical copy of the book because the formatting of the text is really one of the most unique things about the book, and it's very unnerving. Those of you that have picked up the book will know what I'm talking about. And it's very fitting for a book about the world going blind because it is so unnerving. None of the characters actually have names, which also kind of keeps you off your feet and you never quite feel grounded. So if you've tried to read this book and you just couldn't get into it because of the formatting, I would really recommend picking up the audiobook. Jonathan Davis does a great job and it flows really well. My two favorite characters in this book are the woman in the dark glasses and the doctor's wife. The Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix was next. And honestly, after reading the first two books, Sabriel and Lirael, I just wasn't a huge fan. I thought they were good, but nothing mind-blowing. I loved the idea of the bells and keeping the dead dead, but the writing itself just didn't do much for me. Then I got to the final book, Abhorsen, and it changed everything. Sabriel and Lirael will never be my favorite books, but I loved the way the series got wrapped up. And after I finished Abhorsen, I went and found my physical copy of Sabriel that I've had since I was 12 and I never read, and I reread the first half, and I enjoyed it so much more the second time. So if you're like me and you didn't really love the first books, stick with it and maybe Abhorsen will change your mind. It really changed mine. It's narrated by Tim Curry, who I love, but he also narrates the series of unfortunate events, which I've listened to a couple of times, and whenever he would do voices, it would always remind me of the sillier characters from that series. He did a great job, but it would occasionally pull me out of the fantasy of the Old Kingdom. Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson is next, and I'm a huge Brandon Sanderson fan, so of course I loved it. It's not my favorite of his books, but it is fantastic. His ability to build such interesting and unique worlds and make such lovable characters will always amaze me. I think this would be the book I would recommend to people that haven't tried Brandon Sanderson yet and want to get a taste for him. This book was narrated by Alyssa Bresnahan, and I don't really listen to a lot of audiobooks narrated by women. Not by choice, just because the books I pick up just always seem to be narrated by men, but she does an excellent job and her character voices are really great. I'm really hoping this doesn't remain a standalone book. Moby Dick by Herman Melville was next. This was another book that I went into not really knowing everything about it. I was expecting Captain Ahab and his score to settle with the white whale Moby Dick, but that's about all I knew. So I was expecting a grand adventure, and it's a beloved classic, so what's not to love, right? Well, it started out really good for me. I loved the friendship and relationship between Ishmael and Queequeg before they got on the ship. Herman Melville can string some words together. He is great. But then I got to the middle of the book. I don't want this to turn into some big rant. It is a beloved classic and millions of people love it, and I can understand why. So this is just my opinion. I can't stand the book. For me, the graphic descriptions of whale butchery while under the umbrella of how noble a profession whaling is just really disturbed me, and I will never read this book again. I'm glad I read it, I guess, so that I can say I've read it, but I will never read it again. Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan, the first in the Rare series, was my next book. And it is a reread, but I needed something to lift my spirits after Moby Dick. And I'm about this close to just saying that the Rare series is my favorite series of all time. Hadrian and Royce have such a great dynamic, and I just have fun reading the books. They just make me happy. They're my happy books. And so I'm sure down the road somewhere I'll do a discussion or at least reviews after I finish rereading them all. So for right now, I'll just say that I love the books and I would highly recommend them to anyone who loves just a great fantasy adventure. Next came the novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. It's in a collection of 4 novellas by Stephen King called Different Seasons. I only listened to Shawshank, but the collection also contains Stand By Me, so I will probably go back and listen to the other ones at some point. Now, if you've seen the movie, which you should if you haven't, it's really great, you'll basically know the story. It follows the novella very closely, and it's a very short read. I think it's only about 100 pages, and it really is incredible. I love Stephen King, and I think this is one of my favorite stories he's written. I love the characters, and I just love the story, and it has no magic in it, which Stephen King's things usually have some kind of supernatural, and this is just a great story. It's narrated by Frank Muller, who's great. I just really wish it was by Morgan Freeman because the entire story is told by Red, and my dearest wish is that someday Morgan Freeman will release a version of him narrating. The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry was my only physical book I read this month, and I really enjoyed it. It's about an elderly man, I think he's 65, that decides to walk 500 miles, or kilometers, to visit his old friend that's dying of cancer. And she can't die until he gets there, so she has to wait for him. And it's the story of all the people he meets along the way and his wife that he leaves behind. So I found this story really heartbreaking, and it will stick with you after you finish it, but I found it so sad because I can see how easy it would be to go from being so in love and so happy with the person you're married to or your partner and then end up as miserable as these two people were in the very beginning of the novel. It's kind of a scary thought. Alloy of Law, Shadows of Self, and The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson were next. I already did a full review on these that I will link in the description, but they're set 300 years after the end of the original Mistborn trilogy, and there's a barrel of fun. They're great reads. They're very short and easy to just zip right through. Michael Kramer narrates them, and he's also one of my favorite narrators. He does a great job with voices, and you're never confused at who's talking. And after just a little dose of Stephen King with Shawshank Redemption, I decided to finish January up with The Green Mile. I love the movie, and I was sure I would like the book. Now, I can't watch the movie without crying buckets, and I cannot read or listen to the novel without also crying. Luckily, everyone at my work knows that I cry at books because at the end of this one, I just had tears streaming down my face. Stephen King actually wrote this as kind of an installment, so it was 6 about 100-page installments. And so you can feel that while reading it because there are many little cliffhangers and some great twists. Michael Kramer also narrates this, and as usual, he does a fantastic job. That was it for January 2016. The only thing I have planned to read for next month is the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown, because the 3rd and final book comes out next month. Love the first 2, and I'm really excited to reread them and then see how it all wraps up with Morning Star. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave me a comment with any of your thoughts, or if you'd like me to do a book review or discussion on any of the books I talked about today. Enjoy your book ventures, and I'll see you real soon.